This is the story of students mocked the janitor's notebook until the black millionaire read the first page as it truly unfolded. The fluorescent lights of Lincoln High School cast their familiar harsh glow across the polished hallway floors at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the first bell would summon another day of teenage chaos. Marcus Williams pushed his yellow cart methodically from locker to locker, the wheels squeaking in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to his mornings for the past 3 years. At 52, his hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his eyes held the quiet dignity of a man who understood that every job had its purpose, even if others couldn't see it. The notebook, tucked carefully in his shirt pocket, was worn at the edges. Its blue cover faded from countless hours of handling. Marcus had carried it everywhere since his daughter's accident 2 years ago, filling its pages with thoughts, observations, and something else entirely that the students of Lincoln High would never suspect. If you've ever wondered how the smallest acts of cruelty can ripple into something much larger, stay with me through this story. As the morning progressed and students began filtering through the doors, Marcus became invisible in the way that service workers often do. Teenagers rushed past him, their conversations a blur of weekend plans, test anxiety, and social drama. He had learned to navigate around their energy like water around stones, never interrupting their flow, but always present, always watching, always learning. It was during third period when everything changed. Marcus was cleaning the windows near the advanced placement literature classroom when he heard the familiar sound of something hitting the floor. His notebook had slipped from his pocket, falling open near the feet of 3 students who had been granted hall passes to visit the library. Brittany Chen, the student council president with perfectly straightened hair and a college-bound confidence that bordered on arrogance, was the first to notice. She bent down and picked up the notebook, her manicured fingers flipping through pages filled with Marcus's careful handwriting. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to something approaching disdain. "Oh my God, you guys, look at this!" she called to her companions, Jake Morrison and Ashley Rodriguez. "The janitor thinks he's some kind of writer." Jake, whose father owned 3 car dealerships and whose future was already mapped out in dollar signs, snatched the notebook from Brittany's hands. He began reading aloud in an exaggerated, mocking tone that carried down the hallway like poison. Chapter 1. The weight of dreams deferred settles on a man's shoulders like snow that never melts. He paused to laugh, a sound devoid of warmth. What is this garbage? Does he think he's Maya Angelou or something? Ashley, who prided herself on her social media following and her ability to capture the perfect selfie, pulled out her phone. "And this is too good not to share," she said, beginning to record as Jake continued his cruel performance. "Listen to this. In the spaces between what we hope for and what we receive, entire universes of possibility collapse into the singular point of now. I mean, seriously." He cleans toilets for a living. Marcus stood frozen by the window, his spray bottle suspended in mid-air, watching his most private thoughts become entertainment for teenagers who had never known a day of real struggle. The words he had written during sleepless nights, the poetry that had helped him process his daughter's paralysis, the novel he had been crafting about a community's resilience in the face of systemic neglect, all of it was being reduced to a joke by children who couldn't imagine that wisdom might come from unexpected places. The hallway began to fill with other students drawn by the commotion. Word spread with the viral speed that only high school gossip could achieve. By lunch, videos of Jake's performance had been shared across multiple social media platforms, tagged with laughing emojis and comments that cut deeper than their authors probably intended. "Janitor thinks he's Shakespeare," read one caption. "When keeping it real goes wrong," read another. Marcus continued his work that day with the same quiet professionalism he had always maintained, but something fundamental had shifted. The notebook remained in the lost and found office, and he didn't ask for it back. The students who had mocked him avoided eye contact, perhaps sensing that they had crossed a line they couldn't quite define. What none of them knew was that Marcus Williams held a master's degree in English literature from Howard University. What they couldn't have guessed was that before his daughter Keisha's car accident had drained his savings and forced him to take whatever work he could find, he had been an adjunct professor at the local community college. What they never suspected was that the novel in that notebook was nearly complete, a work of literary fiction that explored themes of dignity, resilience, and the invisible barriers that keep communities divided. But perhaps most importantly, what they couldn't have imagined was that Dr. James Washington, a successful businessman and philanthropist who had built a media empire from nothing, was scheduled to visit Lincoln High School the following week as part of his foundation's literacy initiative. Dr. Washington arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. At 65, he moved with the confidence of a man who had earned every dollar in his bank account and every degree on his wall. His foundation had donated millions to educational programs across the country, but he insisted on visiting schools personally, believing that real change happened through human connection, not just financial transactions. The school's administration had prepared a carefully orchestrated presentation, complete with student testimonials and academic achievement statistics. Dr. Washington listened politely, but his attention was drawn to something else entirely. During a break in the formal program, he noticed a small crowd of students gathered around a phone, their laughter carrying an edge that made him uncomfortable. "What's so funny?" he asked, approaching the group with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of mentoring young people. Brittany, recognizing an opportunity to impress an important visitor, eagerly showed him the video of Jake mocking Marcus's writing. "It's just this janitor who thinks he can write," she explained, expecting Dr. Washington to share in their amusement. Instead, Dr. Washington's expression grew serious as he watched the footage. When Jake's voice reached the line about the weight of dreams deferred, something clicked in the older man's mind. He had heard that phrase before, or something very much like it. The rhythm of the language, the sophisticated metaphorical structure, the way the words built upon each other. This wasn't the work of someone playing at being a writer. This was the real thing. "Where is this notebook now?" Dr. Washington asked, his voice carrying a gravity that made the students shift uncomfortably. "Probably in the lost and found," Ashley replied, suddenly uncertain whether she should still be smiling. Dr. Washington excused himself from the group and made his way to the main office, where he requested to see the notebook. The secretary, flustered by the attention from such an important visitor, quickly retrieved it from a box of forgotten items. As Dr. Washington opened the worn cover and began to read, his eyebrows rose steadily higher. The writing was extraordinary. Not just good for a janitor, not just surprisingly literate, but genuinely, undeniably brilliant. The novel told the story of a community fighting against environmental racism, where a chemical plant's pollution had been slowly poisoning a predominantly black neighborhood for decades. The protagonist was a maintenance worker who discovered internal company documents proving the corporation knew about the contamination but had chosen to continue operations because the affected community lacked political power. But it was more than just a story about environmental justice. Marcus had woven in themes of fatherhood, sacrifice, and the way that love could sustain people through impossible circumstances. The character development was nuanced, the dialogue authentic, and the prose itself was lyrical without being pretentious. Dr. Washington found himself completely absorbed, reading page after page while standing in the school office. "I need to speak with Marcus Williams immediately," he told the secretary, his voice carrying an urgency that brooked no argument. Marcus was summoned from the gymnasium, where he had been mopping the floors after a particularly messy lunch period. He arrived at the office still wearing his work uniform, his hands still damp from the industrial soap he used to clean the floors. When he saw Dr. Washington holding his notebook, his face went through a series of emotions: embarrassment, resignation, And finally, a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished. "Mr. Williams," Dr. Washington said, extending his hand, "I'm James Washington. I've just read portions of your novel, and I need to ask you something very important. Are you the sole author of this work?" Marcus nodded slowly, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Yes, sir. Every word." Dr. Washington studied the man before him, seeing past the uniform to the intelligence and creativity that radiated from his eyes. "Mr. Williams, I've been in the publishing business for over 30 years. I've read thousands of manuscripts, worked with dozens of best-selling authors, and I can tell you without hesitation that what you've written here is exceptional. This isn't just good writing, this is important writing." The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "I appreciate that, sir, but I'm not sure what you're getting at." "What I'm getting at," Dr. Washington said, his voice growing stronger, "is that I want to publish this novel. My company has a literary imprint, and we're always looking for voices that can speak truth to power while telling deeply human stories. This book does both." Marcus blinked, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "I want to offer you a book deal, Mr. Williams, a real one, with a substantial advance and a marketing campaign that will ensure this story reaches the audience it deserves. But more than that, I want to offer you something else. My foundation is launching a new program to identify and support writers from underrepresented communities who are working in non-traditional circumstances. You would be our first fellow." The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours. Dr. Washington learned about Marcus's background, his daughter's accident, and the financial pressures that had forced him to leave academia. Marcus learned about Dr. Washington's own journey from poverty to success, and his commitment to using his resources to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. By the time their meeting concluded, Marcus had signed a preliminary agreement that would change his life forever. The advance alone was enough to cover Keisha's medical expenses for the next 2 years and allow him to return to writing full-time. But perhaps more importantly, he had found someone who understood that talent and worth weren't determined by job titles or social status. Word of the meeting spread through the school with the same viral speed that had carried the original mockery. But now the tone was entirely different. Students who had laughed at Marcus's writing suddenly found themselves face to face with the reality that they had mocked someone whose talent far exceeded anything they might ever achieve. Brittany, Jake, and Ashley were called to the principal's office that afternoon, where they found Dr. Washington waiting for them alongside the school's administration. The conversation that followed was unlike anything they had experienced in their young lives. "I want you to understand something," Dr. Washington said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "What you did to Mr. Williams wasn't just cruel. It was a perfect example of the kind of thinking that keeps our society divided. You assumed that because someone works as a janitor, they couldn't possibly have anything valuable to contribute to the world of literature. You reduced a human being to his job title and decided that gave you the right to mock his dreams." The 3 students sat in uncomfortable silence, beginning to grasp the magnitude of their mistake. "But here's what I want you to really think about," Dr. Washington continued. "Mr. Williams continued to do his job with dignity and professionalism even after you humiliated him. He didn't retaliate, he didn't complain to the administration, and he didn't let your cruelty stop him from pursuing his passion. That's the kind of character that creates lasting success, not just in writing, but in life." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "The novel you mocked is going to be published by one of the most respected literary presses in the country. It will likely win awards, and it will definitely change lives. And someday, when you're older and hopefully wiser, you'll remember this moment and understand that you had the chance to witness greatness, but instead chose to ridicule it." The aftermath of that day rippled through Lincoln High School like stones thrown into still water. The video that had once been shared as entertainment was now viewed with shame and embarrassment. Students who had participated in the mockery found themselves grappling with questions about their own character and values. But the most profound changes were happening in Marcus Williams himself. For the first time in years, he walked through the halls of Lincoln High with his head held high, not because his circumstances had changed, but because he had been reminded of his own worth. Dr. Washington had arranged for him to transition gradually from his janitorial position to a full-time writing fellowship, ensuring that he could maintain his income while pursuing his literary career. The novel, which would eventually be titled The Weight of Dreams, was published 8 months later to critical acclaim. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was selected for several prominent book clubs. More importantly, it sparked conversations about environmental justice, class prejudice, and the hidden talents that exist in every community if we're willing to look beyond our assumptions. Marcus used his newfound platform to advocate for educational opportunities for working adults and to challenge the stereotypes that limit how we see each other. He returned to Lincoln High School not as a janitor, but as a guest speaker, sharing his story with a new generation of students who needed to understand that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. During his speech, he addressed the students who had mocked him directly, but without malice or resentment. "I want to thank you," he said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "because your reaction taught me something important about the power of perseverance. When you mocked my writing, you gave me a choice. I could let your words define me, or I could let them motivate me. I chose motivation, and that choice changed everything." The 3 students who had started it all were in the audience that day, now seniors preparing for college. Brittany had spent months grappling with the shame of her actions and had begun volunteering with literacy programs in underserved communities. Jake had started questioning the privilege that had shaped his worldview and was considering a career in social work rather than business. Ashley had deleted the original video and had become an advocate against cyberbullying. As Marcus concluded his speech, he pulled out a new notebook, this one fresh and unmarked, full of possibilities. "Dreams deferred don't have to become dreams denied," he said, echoing the themes that had made his novel so powerful. "Sometimes they just need the right moment to bloom." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but more importantly, it represented something deeper than applause. It was recognition, respect, and perhaps most crucially, understanding. The students of Lincoln High School had learned that wisdom, talent, and worth aren't distributed according to job titles or social status, but exist in every human being who has the courage to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles. Dr. Washington, who had remained in touch with Marcus throughout his literary journey, watched from the back of the auditorium with quiet satisfaction. His foundation's mission was to identify and nurture talent wherever it existed, but Marcus Williams had taught him something new about the power of second chances and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. In the months that followed, Marcus's story became a catalyst for broader changes at Lincoln High School. The administration implemented new programs designed to break down social barriers between students and staff. Teachers began incorporating lessons about dignity, respect, and the danger of assumptions into their curricula. Most importantly, the school community began to see each other as complete human beings rather than collections of stereotypes and job descriptions. Marcus Williams continued to write, producing a second novel that explored themes of redemption and forgiveness. He also began teaching creative writing workshops for adults who had been told their dreams were impractical or impossible. His daughter Keisha, inspired by her father's success and the quality care that his book advance had allowed her to receive, began her own journey toward recovery and independence. The notebook that had started it all was eventually donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. where it serves as a reminder that literature can emerge from any corner of society, and that the most powerful stories often come from those who have been overlooked or underestimated. As the sun set on another day at Lincoln High School, Marcus Williams walked through the same hallways where he had once pushed a yellow cart, but now he carried himself differently. Not because his external circumstances had changed, though they had, but because he had been reminded of a fundamental truth that too many people forget. Every person carries within them the potential for greatness, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look beyond the surface to unlock that potential. The story of Marcus Williams and his notebook became more than just a tale of individual triumph. It became a lesson about the power of perseverance, the importance of treating every person with dignity, and the incredible things that can happen when we choose to see the humanity in each other rather than the limitations we assume exist. If this story reminds you that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places, consider sharing it with someone who needs to remember their own potential. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply believe in each other's dreams.